So we are looking at doing the very thing that we started off talking about. So if advanced beings are traveling the cosmos and they are landing on planets and they have to live on them, they modify themselves. Now look at us. Thus we have become like the gods. We are starting to do the same kinds of things, but not at their level. We have to be very careful, because you can end up making us obviously into freaks. I don't know if anyone remembers the quote from Elon Musk, because with the right RNA code, you can turn someone into a freaking butterfly. But that's the reality. So we have to be careful, but there is the potential there to utilize the same technologies that were used to create us to fix some of these problems. The fact that HAR1 was essentially frozen in time through hundreds of millions of years indicates that it does something very important. That it then underwent abrupt revision in humans suggests that this function was significantly modified in our lineage. Statistically speaking, the probability that a highly conserved DNA sequence will change multiple times over 6 million years of evolution is close to zero. That's Catherine Pollard, PhD biostatistician at the Gladstone Institute, one of the main scholars of this field. Is this the discovery of a chance event around 1 million years ago that changed human brains forever? I contacted the team. I wanted to check about that date, because they're giving me a vague date. So you actually said it's 1 million years ago? And they said, no, we're not. We just know that it happened before the split from Neanderthals and Denisovans, somewhere in that point. So the same point we've been dealing with chromosome 2. And here you can see the rapidly expanding human brain. So at this point, brain is increasing with body size. Right? So we understand what's going on there. Body size is getting bigger, your head's getting bigger, your brain gets bigger. But then, around this point here, something wackadoodle-doo happens. Because you can see here, look, it just goes off the charts. And so that is occurring. The first leap is with Homo erectus, which has a larger body. So that one, there's a change here, which is anomalous. But I'm not going to go into Homo erectus anomalies today, but there is the potential that Homo erectus was an engineered hominin as well. But right here, we have this sudden acceleration, which is no longer coupled to body size. It's just our head, our skull is just expanding, our brain is expanding. The origin of the human species, chromosome fusion. One of the profound changes that's considered to be foundational to modern humans is this chromosomal fusion event. And so we know it occurs before the split with Neanderthals and Denisovans. So in other words, it's happening in that same period as we saw in the earlier chart, around 780,000 years ago, where they're starting to diverge. There's the chromosome fusion event. Has to have occurred back then because Denisovans and Neanderthals also carry it, and they split away from us after that. Now, humans faced a close call with extinction nearly 1 million years ago. Right? So I don't know if any of you caught this, but the data now suggests that there was about 100,000 people living on Earth, people, archaic humans that were living on Earth going back about 1 million years ago. And then something really strange happens, that there is a population drop. And it goes from this around 100,000 interbreeding people, and they lose around 99% of the breeding population. That's not all, though. Of course it's not all, is it? There's going to be more to it. Because remember we talked about us, human beings. What was going on for us back then? Well, around about that time, as you can see here, just prior to that, we have the super archaic hominins. So these are basically Homo erectus and other Homo types that lived at that period, very archaic. Some of them, well, put it this way, if you could recognize them. If you were in the zoo, you'd say, what's that guy doing in the cage? But if they sat next to you on the bus, you'd get off. So they're somewhere in the between, right? They're not quite us, but they're definitely not quite apes. So we can see that. But then there is a transition occurs around about 800,000 years ago. And this is the splits occurring where we have these new lineages of archaic humans are forming from the super archaics. And so that's happening right in that period there, where they've marked as 765 to 550,000 years ago. So in other words, we are seeing there the transition from the super archaics. Some of them still survive, they live on for quite a while. But we transition from there, and then there's another split. And you can see the modern humans split away from the others, like the Neanderthal Sema hominins, Denisovans, and there's many others who don't have names. They're only known from the genomics at the moment, so we call them ghost populations, because we know they're in our DNA, but we don't know what they look like. So although you would have heard of Neanderthals and Denisovans, they weren't the only large-brained hominins. There were others whose names are not yet ascribed, but certainly there was at least about 6 different types of large-brained humans that coincided. But they all emerge in that period here. So we go from a fairly stable kind of population type, mostly Homo erectus and variants of Homo erectus, to suddenly a weird thing happens here, which starts throwing out all of these large-brained humans. And that's there's obviously later splits again between the groups. So that's happening again, right in that time that we've been talking about. Isn't that funny? Some news that just came in the last week, which has been really important for my work, because look, if you propose a hypothesis, as new evidence is found, it will either strengthen or weaken your work. That's just the way that science works. If the new evidence doesn't square with what you're saying, it's weakening your work, you're probably wrong. If new evidence comes and it fits well with your hypothesis, you're probably right. Now, this was a study that's just came out. Humans faced a close call with extinction nearly 1 million years ago, right? So I don't know if any of you caught this, but the data now suggests that there was about 100,000 people living on Earth. People, archaic humans that were living on Earth going back about 1 million years ago. And then something really strange happens, that there is a population drop. And it goes from this around 100,000 interbreeding people, and they lose around 99% of the breeding population in what seems to be a very sudden event. And they end up at around 1,300 people. And so that's all of us come from those 1,300 approximate people. Those are our direct ancestors. And so when does that occur? Well, they found that this seems to be happening during a period around about 900,000 to 800,000 years ago. So that's kind of intriguing, because of course the upper end of that is back into what we've been talking about. So we've got somewhere in there is this drop. But really, the first part of that, what's important, why it's happening in 900,000, and what is actually happening here, I should clarify. The mainstream view at the moment is that this doesn't make sense. It just does not make sense. It must be wrong, because there isn't a clear event that would just level 99% of the humans on Earth. So they're saying, is there climatic, is there environmental change? What could do that? It's profound. And we don't see it clearly in the fossil record. It seems like there's still hominins wandering about. So how can we lose 99% of them like that? Doesn't seem to add up. So how does that happen, right? If it's not a climatic disaster, if it's not an asteroid impact, if it's not something like that, if you haven't killed off these people, why would you suddenly contract to just 1,000 ancestors interbreeding? Why aren't they mixing with these other people that seem to be still alive? And so that's the conundrum for the scientists at the moment. For me, that's not a conundrum, because this is a prediction of my work. I suggest that if these beings generally were here and they say they modified hominins in Australia, well, that's another problem for science as well, because hominids aren't meant to be in Australia. But they should have been, because around 1 million years ago, our archaic hominin ancestors, probably Homo erectus, they crossed into island Southeast Asia. We know that because of the finds on Flores, million-year-old Homo erectus remains and tools. So they have done what is considered the impossible. They crossed Wallace's line, and Wallace's line is what's thought of as the impenetrable barrier between Southeast Asia and Oceania. Shouldn't have been able to cross there. Mammals aren't supposed to have. Only rats got across on some bits of wood. That was the old hypothesis, right? But no, the tides and stuff there, the climate, all these things stopped mammals, and that's why we have a different ecosystem in Australia, because the mammals were prevented from entering. But if you can get to Flores, you're just off the coast of Australia. So there's been this conundrum. Well, if they've done all the work and they've used watercraft, they can't have swum. So if they've used watercraft and they've got to Flores, why aren't they sailing down to this giant continent just to the south? They can see it from the tops of the mountains on Flores. Why wouldn't they go there? Well, they would. It doesn't make any sense. So in my original work, I said probably within the next 100,000 years, I said being very generous, I think they could have done it in a couple of years, but being generous, we'll allow them a bit of time, that they should have reached Australia. Well, 900,000 years ago, we have this sudden population drop. Rather than being a cataclysmic ending of all 99% of our ancestors, that is the signature of a divergence event and a founder effect. In other words, a small splinter group becomes isolated. One of the perfect places to become isolated on our planet was Australia. So as they cross through down into Australia, they lose access to all of these other humans. So suddenly you get a drop down like that. There's no cataclysm. They don't need a cataclysm to explain this. So once they're there, they're also in a new environment, unique. So evolution will change them anyway, and they will also have problems. So the population stays quite small. We're going to see that. You can see it more visual because you get just how profound this drop is. From that to that, bang, we lose all those people. Oh, where did they go? and then it's like that, and it stays like that for about 100,000 years. So you've got a small group of people in a difficult environment, barely hanging on, nearly extinct. So this is considered high extinction risk. So we almost went extinct. Also, in that period, you can see here on the right, there is understood to be a chromosomal fusion event, that two ancestral primate chromosomes become fused, and they give us chromosome 2. And so that is occurring in this same time as this sudden event here, and in this strange bottleneck. The other thing you notice here is, after this very, very steep sort of wine glass event here, there's almost a bang, a population explosion, it looks like, but it's not a population explosion. That is our ancestors leaving Oceania and returning to mainland Asia. They now have access to all of the other humans who are still alive, were still out there, and they are now breeding with them again. So we're up to 27,160 individuals at that point. That's still not back to the same levels as before. Two possibilities there. One, that a lot of these people did somehow die off from unknown events, or there's a new reproductive barrier, chromosome 2 fusion. They've got a different number of chromosomes to all the other hominins. So although they can mate with each other, they will have a lot of problems. So they will not have children with every reproduction event, cutting down the number of people. So this is probably, the population is still like that. But our ancestors are not successful in reproducing with a lot of these other people. They're too different now. We have this steady population size that goes all the way down until the repopulating of Eurasia and the expansion of what become early modern humans, eventually onto fully modern humans down here. Now there's parts of that model that I disagree with profoundly, which is tackled into the Inter-Africa books. You'll note this is an out-of-Africa event. I contest that completely, that this is an inter-Africa event, that we have people that are in Oceania and that they are moving out at this point into Southeast Asia, East Asia, and eventually arrive in Europe and then cross into Africa. There are people in Africa as well, but the ancestral groups, they're moving out of Australia. So it runs completely counter, and there's a lot of reasons why it runs counter, which I tackle in that, so I won't drag you into that, because that in itself is another multi-hour presentation. So as we tackled briefly, the origin of the human species, chromosome fusion, one of the profound changes that's considered to be foundational to modern humans is this chromosomal fusion event. And so we know it occurs before the split with Neanderthals and Denisovans. So in other words, it's happening in that same period as we saw in the earlier chart, around 780,000 years ago, where they're starting to diverge. There's the chromosome fusion event. Has to have occurred back then because Denisovans and Neanderthals also carry it, and they split away from us after that. So in other words, it has to occur just before all of these strange new humans start appearing. Obviously isolates us reproductively from gorillas and bonobos and chimps to a greater degree than we already were. The other thing about the chromosome 2 fusion event, I should say as well, is that when they look at this, they say, well, normally a chromosome error is a problem, serious problem. Now we can see that today. Mostly if you have a chromosomal error, you are either infertile or have other serious health issues. Sometimes it's neutral and it won't cause a lot of noticeable problems, but it is not normally considered to be a benefit, put it that way. In this case, there's three things that really have to happen, because we have a total replacement. We don't have somebody has this chromosome number and that then it fades away into a population which don't have this, which is what usually happens with anomalies. They are reabsorbed. Right? That doesn't happen. There's a total replacement. All the humans on the planet end up with the new chromosome number. Well, that's weird. How does that happen? Well, it happens with three constraints. The chromosome fusion has to occur in a small, isolated population. As we already tackled, it seems like we had a small, isolated population. Therefore, it can become stable in that population. The second thing is it has to really occur in more than one person in a generation. So there's some interbreeding between people with that chromosome count. And the third one is it has to give extraordinary benefits, something that allows those people to outcompete other humans. So this is like an upgrade. And here you can see the rapidly expanding human brain. So at this point, brain is increasing with body size. Right? So we understand what's going on there. Body size is getting bigger, your head's getting bigger, your brain gets bigger. But then, around this point here, something wackadoodle-doo happens. Because you can see here, look, it just goes off the charts. And so that is occurring. The first leap is with Homo erectus, which has a larger body. So that one, there's a change here, which is anomalous. But I'm not going to go into Homo erectus anomalies today, but there is the potential that Homo erectus was an engineered hominin as well. But right here, we have this sudden acceleration, which is no longer coupled to body size. It's just our head, our skull is just expanding, our brain is expanding, and goes off the charts. So they knew that something weird had happened around 800,000 years ago. We've known that from the fossil record for many decades. What we didn't know is why. But with genetic studies, we're starting to understand that that is coupled to a lot of weird changes that are going on. Not least chromosome 2, but not only. Again, in the last few months, another event, strength of my work, is the discovery of a chance event around 1 million years ago that changed human brains forever. I contacted the team. I wanted to check about that date, because I'm giving me a vague date. So you actually said it's 1 million years ago? And they said, no, we're not. We just know that it happened before the split from Neanderthals and Denisovans, somewhere in that point. So the same point we've been dealing with chromosome 2. Again, I like to check these things. If you're going to propose something like this as real, you've got to be able to, stand there and debate with people that will make a fool of me if I get this wrong. So I wanted to make sure that I understood what they were saying and I wasn't wrong. So there is a chance rearrangement of the human genome. So not 1 million years ago. So at the beginning of that shift, which we talked about, closer to 800,000 years ago, probably kick-started the evolution of modern humans from our primate ancestors. A recent study explains why human DNA contains sections, many of which are involved in brain development, that are unique to us and are not shared even with our closest relatives, chimpanzees. Their research so far does show just how unique and unlikely the evolution of the human brain really is. So in other words, this is an event that happens overnight. This isn't not slow accumulation of mutations. What they have found is there was a singular event. They think either a single sperm or a single egg or a single fetus, that there is a massive rearrangement of the human genome. And it changed it in ways where parts that are now touching, which activate segments, which change our brain, particularly change our brain. There's nothing else like it. They compared this, it came out of a study called the Zoonomia Project, which was contrasting a range of mammals, hundreds of mammals. We are unique. This does not occur in any other mammal species. So there's a range of other changes in there, hundreds, that are unique to us, called human accelerated regions. And these are in what's called non-coding DNA regions. And in fact, profoundly conserved regions. So if you think of the genome, we have genes, which most people know about genes. We also have what used to be called junk DNA. That's now called non-coding DNA. And in non-coding DNA, we have highly conserved regions, which are strips of code which haven't changed in millions of years, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of years, and are identical or near to identical across all mammals. So they are doing something profoundly important. When they change, mostly the organisms die. So the best example is HAR1, which I think is on this one. HAR1, the first one they discovered a few years back. They contrasted this is a 118 letter long sequence, and they ran the tests on this. So they said that this basically should be identical in our species, chimps particularly. So they ran it against chimpanzees and chickens. Chickens have been distinct from us for 300 million years. Chimps only for about 7. So when they contrasted these species, what they found is that between the chimp and the chicken, HAR1 had 2 successful mutations. So one successful change for every 150 million years of evolution. That's pretty darned fixed. So we know the rate it should change at. When they contrasted the same segment between chimps and humans, where there should be no change, 7 million years, that's nothing in that scale, they found that 18 letters had changed. And so they say the fact that HAR1 was essentially frozen in time through hundreds of millions of years indicates that it does something very important. That it then underwent abrupt revision in humans suggests that this function was significantly modified in our lineage. Statistically speaking, the probability that a highly conserved DNA sequence will change multiple times over 6 million years of evolution is close to 0. That's Catherine Pollard, PhD biostatistician at the Gladstone Institute, one of the main scholars of this field. So, what else is going on? I'd love to say that was the end of it, but it's not. Turns out there's some other really weird stuff going on here. Study finds missing genetic information in the human genome that contributed to evolutionary advancements. Now this is really running counter to expectations again. and they point here. So these are large segments of code, mainly from the highly conserved regions. Again, these super stable regions. Large segments of code that have just deleted, they've vanished. And they must have been doing something critically important because they're stable in all the other mammals. The deletions are strange because they affect large segments. Some of us are missing large chunks of our genome. These deletions should have negative effects and as a result be eliminated from the population by natural selection. But they're not. They're all there. And what they do, in fact, they found that many of them are contributing to the brain changes. They're giving us a superior cognitive abilities, associated with like the neocortex developing, like profound differences to us and all the other mammals, linked to mysterious deletions, mysterious accelerations, refolding of the genome, a chromosome fusion, all of these things that shouldn't be there. So these are called human conserved deletions, or H-condels, and the previous things we tackled were the human accelerated region, or HARS. So if you want to look those up, you look for HARS and H-condels, and obviously for the 3D genome folding, which we tackled as well, and chromosome 2 fusion. All of those you can look up yourself, check what I'm saying. All of them are unexpected, and all of them are profound. Now the other thing is, about evolution is random, isn't it? That's what they tell us, random. What they found with these HARs is that over 50%, the ones that are identified, are associated with the brain. Doesn't sound so random, does it? Right, the science of evolution of the faulty bodies explained from incompetent sperm to bad metabolism. So you hear a lot, probably if you're familiar with these kind of topics, with the ancient aliens, you hear about upgrades, you hear about it in the New Age community, you hear about it in the aliens, upgrades, we all want these upgrades. But it's not all good news. Because we have a lot of weird problems, humans. I know, so a lot of people have genetic issues, have these genetic diseases, other issues. One of the most profound issues is in our reproductive systems. And I probably don't leave it out, but for a lot of women, and probably, I would say, from my understanding of statistics, the vast majority of women will experience reproductive problems, often horrible reproductive problems, particularly losses of fetuses or losses of children during pregnancy. Right? Why is that? You look at the other primates, you look at them, they're not really having that problem. Not only that, they have very easy childbirths. They have visible ovulation cycles. They have all these things that are really helpful. You'd think evolution would favour that in us. Why did we lose all that stuff? Why did we lose that? Isn't the purpose of an organism to reproduce? Isn't that the most important thing an organism can do, is reproduce? So why would evolution kick us in the nuts like that and say, no, not you lot, the others can have that, you're going to have a bloody nightmare with it? Right, because that's what happens. And we end up with all these severe problems. And no one can quite understand why. Because they say, well, look, if this is, some sort of anomaly in the body, evolution should clear it out. Because those that can reproduce effectively will out-reproduce those that can't, and the problem fixes itself. But it doesn't. Why not? The reason is because it turns out these same segments that are causing these problems are linked to the chain segments that give us the brain and give us the thumbs, give us the anatomy, give us all this stuff. We can't get rid of it. If the evolution tries to sweep it away, it sweeps away everything that's made us successful. So this is the ironic kind of catch-22 of the genetic engineering that I say occurred, is that, remember what we said earlier? We did it with the medical kits from the crafts. That's all we had, just basically the medical kits on the crashed saucers. We didn't have the right kit to do it properly. So what they ended up with is a bodge job. So yes, we get the bigger brains, but we get a whole heap of genetic problems that most organisms don't have. Now we live in an era where, of course, some of this can be addressed using similar technologies, and we can see that is happening. Titled there, Genetically Modified Humans, the X-Men of Scientific Research, that are now looking at changing us, and all the rest of it. Not necessarily all for the good, but one area that is good is looking at ways to fix these genetic diseases. And that is happening. We had CRISPR as one of the technologies, but that's being superseded. There's now a couple of new technologies that are safer and more precise. And my hope is certainly that we can utilise the same kind of technologies that left us with these problems to fix those problems. And that, I think, is in the coming years we're going to start seeing that happen, which I do support. I don't support us being made into freaks by some scientists that would like to do that. But certainly fixing genetic issues. Because we are not going to see this fixed by natural means. Because the same way it was done is the only way we're going to fix this. That's cool, near the end. The other thing that's happening as well, some of you might be familiar with this, is the space space scientists are looking at bioengineering our astronauts, modifying the astronauts for space travel. And one of the things they're looking at is combining us with these, with tardigrades. Now, why are they going to do that? Because they can confer to us radiation-proofing abilities. amongst other things. Obviously, they're a very hardy animal. Most people know about this. Tardigrades possibly living on the moon now from the Israeli crash that dumped a whole load of them onto the moon. We don't know. Maybe they're alive. These things are almost unkillable. So we are looking at doing the very thing that we started off talking about. So if advanced beings are traveling the cosmos and they are landing on planets and they have to live on them, they modify themselves. Now look at us. Thus we have become like the gods. We are starting to do the same kinds of things, but not at their level. We have to be very careful, because you can end up making us obviously into freaks. I don't know if anyone remembers the quote from Elon Musk, because with the right RNA code, you can turn someone into a freaking butterfly. But that's the reality. So we have to be careful, but there is the potential there to utilize the same technologies that were used to create us to fix some of these problems. Now, going forward with my work, obviously I'm the director of the Alien Technosignatures research group. We sort of touched on that earlier, and we are looking to bring to this topic a team of open-minded scientists. Already we've got about 6 people on board, geologists, genetics, some social science people as well, because I think the philosophical and cultural aspects of this are important. If this becomes, in any sense, mainstream, I think the impact will be profound, much more than saying that UFOs are real or that even the aliens live on Mars.